10% of the brain. 10% of the brain and above is what I'm going to talk about now. Because 10% of the brain and above is never really considered in this life on earth. Because when you are talking about purity, simplicity, integrity, and all that, you are, in fact, talking about 10% of the brain and above. We must not always be talking grammar all the time. What do you mean by simplicity? What do you mean by purity? What do you mean by a man who is always pure, who is always clean, who is always good? You simply mean a man who is operating at 10% of the brain and above. Because once you hit 10% of the brain above, you become intoxicated with purity, with goodness. You are only good. No matter the job you do, you are simple, you are good, you are perfect. Perfection is possible, very, very possible. Perfection means extraordinariness. Perfection means excellence. That is what perfection means. So perfection is not something that is unattainable. Perfection is attainable. But to attain perfection, you must get to 10% of the brain and above. And that's what the baby is. The baby is 10% of the brain and above. So he's always good. All the crimes on earth are not committed by a baby. There's no crime that you bring out now and you say somebody 0 to 3 years of age committed the crime. No. A baby, once you're a baby, you are pure. You are perfect. Immediately, you are established that this one is a child. Then, no crime can be committed by a child. So, the great sage, the sage, must get back to 3, to the 0 year. Because that's what 10% of the brain begins from 3 years of age down to the 0. Because 0 or 2, 1 and 0, they are higher. They are up to 30% or so. So 10% of the brain, people don't know that 10% of the brain is just the meaning of whatever you call it. Whether you call it nirvana, whether you call it purity, whether you call it anything, whether you call it heaven. It's just talking about 10% of the brain and above. Because 10% of the brain and above is it. And when you are pure, good, truthful, always righteous, always fine, rightness is what we call righteousness. It's just rightness. When you are right all the time. When you are positive, then the intelligence that follows is right. Positivity and rightness. It's not positivity and negativity, no. When you are 10% of the brain and above, you are talking about positivity and rightness. But when you are lower, below, like when people are jammed at 1% of the brain with the internet, then you are negativity and wrongness, or negativity and error. That's it. Because once you are not within 10% of the brain and above, you are in error. You are negative. But once you are 10%, once you attain 10% of the brain and above, then you are positive. Then you are right. And that is the purity. Rightness and positivity, or positivity and rightness. That's what you mean by purity. That's what you mean by simplicity. That's what you mean by integrity. That is what you mean. Because once your brain is set, and everything on earth depends on the brain. Just that people don't know how to go about it. Because the science calls 10% and above the primitive brain. It's unfortunate, just because it is not known. This 10% of the brain and above is not known. Science tags it, medicine tags it, the primitive brain, because they don't know it. There is 100% of the human sector, the superhuman sector instead. The superhuman sector is 10% of the brain up to 100%. That's that great sector, that great aspect of human life on earth, or of being, is 10% of the brain above. So when we talk about all this, everybody's talking about whatever and all that. You must go to 10% of the brain and above. Once you hit 10% of the brain and above, you have become pure, you have become clean, you have become good, you have become reliable. Any day, you are no longer, your interest is not the interest of the ordinary man. Because what is killing people, what is ruining the country, what has ruined Nigeria is dishonesty, is complexity, dishonesty, and all that. Morality, talk about morality, expertise, all that. So the way to go is the baby way, is the baby-like way, is the childlike way, the way of the sage, the way of the babe, not the way of the philosopher, not the way of the theologian. It is the way, the middle way, the heart way. That's where you must be, because the heart that knows. Heart is all knowing. Heart knows everything. If you operate at the heart level, then you are 10% of the brain and above. That's where you are. If you operate below the heart level, below 10% and above, then you are mind, you are memory, you are imagination. But when you are being, you are everywhere at once. You are all things at once. You are everything. You are just simple, good, fine, and all that. I thank you very much for listening.